thank you so much for joining me. This is Anna, Crafting for the Crafter, and that is you. Today I will be playing around with something that we all have access to, or we all receive in the mail. I know you do. That is envelopes. I will be creating flowers out of recycled envelopes that we get in the mail, that they're sometimes so hideous to receive. And I know that the crafter in you is like me, that we look at this paper that has some type of design on it and you think to yourself, wow, I wish I could use that. So here's an idea for you, and I hope you play along with me. So for this card, I'm going to be using this flower stamp set. This is just an idea. You can also go ahead and freehand draw this on this pattern paper and use this as your flowers. So first what I'm going to do is open all these envelopes. You could use scissors or you can use one of these envelope openers, and just go ahead and open all these up so that we could start stamping on them. To stamp my flowers, I'm going to be using Versafine black pigment ink, and this is just my favorite. Ever since I discovered Versafine ink, that's always my go-to. I like it because it's nice, dark, and you could use it with water. So I'm just going to be placing my little stamps here on my little block and position them to where I can get as many flowers as I can, so I could do as less steps as possible. So the more little flowers I can fit on here, the quicker I can get stamping. And I'm going to be going with this pattern first, which is a bunch of lines crisscrossed, and just go ahead and stamp my flowers all over the paper. You might get lucky and sometimes you find envelopes that are a little larger than others. That gives you more stamping space. So after we have everything stamped, we go ahead and with our scissors we go around these flowers. If you have, of course, the matching die, that'll make it a little easier. If not, good old trusty scissors always help along the way. And the way you want to use your scissors is that you move the paper in different directions to cut it. Instead of moving the scissors, you move the paper. And I found that longer scissors have actually made it easier for me to cut. So I'm just moving the paper, leaving the scissors still, and just moving the paper around those little edges. At some point while I was cutting, I reminded myself of like a driver where I was just moving the steering wheel back and forth. I know it's silly, but that's what it made me feel, and that's exactly what it is sometimes when you're cutting these little flowers. You're moving the paper back and forth and just cutting around the edges. I zoomed in a little bit here for you so that you could see what I mean by leaving a little edge around the flower. And it's just a little bit that you want to leave. And on this other flower, I am going in as close as I can to the very edge of the flower. Just so you can see what I mean by different ways of cutting these. And of course, if you decide to leave an edge, it really is up to you how wide that edge is. But here is one where I go very close to the edge of the stamp. And here they are, side by side. After I'm done cutting all the flowers out of the different envelopes, then I suggest you do this all at once instead of getting one envelope and doing these steps and then getting another one. Just go ahead and stamp all your envelopes and go ahead and cut them. I like to distress the edges of my flowers a little bit. Now here I already decided that the first card I'm going to be making is this one using this green, like an avocado green. So I'm just going to go ahead and usually I grab either the Distress ink by Tim Holtz, either the Antique Linen or Vintage Photo. And since Antique Linen has a little bit more of a yellow tone to it, I decided to use that one instead of Vintage Photo. So I just go around all my flowers and I distress them a little bit. It also helps them give them depth. And with my distress marker, and this is a green that I found that fits the color of the cardstock that I'm going to be using, I go ahead and I just tint the inside of the flowers. Adding a little bit of water and a little bit of ink, a little bit of color. I go in and I go around all the middle parts of the petals of the flower. And this is for it to just match a little bit the color of the cardstock. You could use anything you have, either watercolors, acrylic paint, anything you have to color the insides of the flowers if you wish to, of course. Once I have them all colored, only the ones that I'm going to be using on this particular card, I'm going to go ahead and use one of my favorite techniques for flowers. And I grabbed this foam-like mat. I think it's an embossing mat. It's foam. It's a little looser than foam and thicker, absolutely. And I grab this embossing ball tool. This pack has 3 sizes. And this is precisely for that, to go ahead and mold the flowers. And what we're doing here, we're just breaking the fibers inside the paper, and it helps it curl. Then once you've done the flower as a cup, you press down the center of the flower, and that just lifts it up, and it gives it a very realistic and pretty 3D look. Now I'm just going to be going ahead and doing this on all my flowers. Just go around it with the tool, turn it around, and press the inside, and that'll give us the flower. There are other things that you can also use for this technique, and in this one I'm just using the Sharpie just to show you that you don't have to have a specific tool. And try to get a point that is round as you can. And you just go ahead and you break the fibers up on the flower, on the paper, and then you just press the inside of it. It gives the same effect. You don't have to have fancy tools to do this technique. And here I'm just using this gel pen, my white pen here, show you again that this is doable with anything that you have that could be round at the edge. And just press on it, it gives the same effect. Of course, the ball is a little fancier, but it gives the same effect if you use anything that you may have round. So now for my base, I'm going to go ahead and cut my printed cardstock and the solid color that I'm going to be using as the first layer. If you notice on most of my cards, I use a solid color as my first layer of my card. I just like how it brings out the color of the card. I decide to go ahead and bring out a little bit more of that green out. So what I do is I cut a piece of green cardstock about 1 inch thick, and I'm going to be using this on the card. I go ahead and I distress all the edges of all my papers, the strip, the pattern paper, and the solid one. And then I go ahead with my Crop-A-Dile and I round off the corners of my pattern paper. I like to print the inside of my card first, and I go ahead and I print the back where it has my information. And with my bone folder, I just go ahead and I crease the edge there. As I usually do, I like to cut out the middle piece of my first layer of the card. And this piece I use to cut out what is usually my sentiment with my metal die. And also I like it because it takes weight off of the card, which can sometimes pull the card down, and it doesn't allow it to stand up. It kind of flattens it, opens, if you will. So that is what I do with my first layer. Then I'm ready to put on my pattern paper. And I just like to use liquid glue because it gives you a little bit of room to wiggle and position it correctly, and just make sure that it's properly centered all the way around. Now the card is ready for the strip, a green strip that I'm just going to put glue around it, and I'm just going to place it a little lower than the middle part of the card. Then I'm just going to bring 3 of those flowers for now, and I go ahead and I cut my sentiment out of birthday wishes, and I go ahead with Glossy Accents and just add that all over the sentiment. And this goes quicker than you think. I find myself using Glossy Accents on most of my cards, and it just helps give whatever you put it on, as it says, a glossy accent. It gives it a glossy look, like if it were wet, and it also gives it a certain dimension that I really enjoy, the look that it gives. So that's something I really do suggest. Then I want something for the little dots on my eyes. I decided to go with these gems that I think will give it a nice little touch. And I also want something for the middle of my flowers. And playing around with different options, I decide to go ahead and use pearls. Now I didn't have pearls, the green that I wanted, but I did have an alcohol marker of the green. So I just go ahead and I color the pearl with this green, and it is wonderful. You don't have to have pearls of different colors. You just have to have the markers of different colors, alcohol markers. And this goes the same thing with gems. If you have white clear gems, you can color them with alcohol markers and it'll take on the color of the marker. So I think this is a great option. I'm not happy with the 3 flowers, so I decide to add a 4th one. And this kind of gives it the look that I was going for. Something a little more prominent, something that you could see that would be a little louder than the sentiment. And to finish it off, I decide to use this little flourish. I also die cut it. It is big, so I decide to rip it apart. Put certain parts of it on one spot and then the others on the others. Don't be afraid to play with your die cuts and give them different uses. You don't have to use the die cut as it is. You could break it up and be used to your advantage. We spend so much money on these die cuts that it really is worth playing around with and finding different options for it. So here I'm just playing around, see where I want these little flourishes sticking out from. I think it gives a little finishing touch to the actual flowers, to the little bouquet that we have going on here. And for all this, I keep using my liquid glue. This is Aleene's liquid glue. And this is my preference only because it's strong. So here I'm seeing, it has a lot of shine up here, but what about down on the flowers? I see all the shininess of the gems and then the shininess of the glossy accents, but my flowers don't really have a lot of shine. So I decide to add a little bit of glitter. Can't go wrong with glitter. Glitter always finishes a project out beautifully. So there are different types of glitter. Well, actually, the ones I'm using are Stickles. They do have like a little undertone. On some you have a little undertone of blue, on others you have a little undertone of like brown, I could say. So I go ahead and I pick the one that has a little undertone of like yellowish, greenish, just to finish off the flowers. And I think that is the perfect touch. It just elevated the card to another level. So I was very content with how this turned out. I hope you enjoyed. This is my card for today. I hope you get inspired. I hope you create. And as always, I hope you are happy. Thank you so much. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Vamos a destaparlo. Aquí. Está. Todo explotó.